You've felt it at the grocery store. You've seen it at the gas pump. That nagging sense that your paycheck, the one you work so hard for, just doesn't stretch as far as it did last year. It feels like you're running faster and faster on a treadmill just to stay in the same place. This erosion of your money's value has a name: inflation. And here is the strangest part of all. The people in charge, the central bankers in their quiet, formidable buildings, are not trying to stop it. In fact, they are actively trying to create it. Their official goal is not zero inflation, it's 2%. They have decided, as a matter of policy, that your money should lose about 2% of its value every single year. Price stability, in the language of modern economics, officially means prices will constantly and predictably go up. So why is it like this? Why would anyone design a system where saving money is a losing game by default? To understand this, you can't look at today's headlines. You have to look at the ghosts of the past. This is the real story of why your money loses value. It is not an accident. It is a calculated choice. The decision by central bankers in the late 1980s to combat the memory of 1970s stagflation with an arbitrary 2% inflation target created today's permanent system of currency debasement. This system was born from a deep-seated institutional fear, a terror of one economic monster that made them embrace the slow, corrosive risk of another. They feared the ghost of deflation more than they feared the slow erosion of your household savings. To uncover why this happened, we have to travel back in time and meet the two ghosts that haunt every central banker. First, we'll descend into the Great Depression, a time so catastrophic it convinced an entire generation of economists that a little bit of poison, a little bit of inflation, was a necessary medicine. Then, we'll see what happened in the 1970s when that medicine became the disease itself, creating a new crisis and a second ghost. Finally, we'll discover how one man's desperate guess in a tiny country became the unchallenged dogma that governs your bank account today. This is the story of how a system that feels broken is, in fact, working exactly as designed. To understand why our leaders want your money to lose value, you first need to understand their deepest fear: a world where it gains value too quickly. This is the world of the Great Depression. It's a world of deflation. On the surface, falling prices sound like a good thing. Who wouldn't want a new car or a loaf of bread to be cheaper next month than it is today? But here's the problem, the one that haunted the minds of every economist who lived through the 1930s. Because if you know everything will be cheaper tomorrow, you stop buying things today. And when you stop buying, the person who sells to you loses income. When they lose income, they stop buying from their suppliers. This chain reaction creates a death spiral. Businesses fail, factories shut down, and workers are laid off. Those unemployed workers then buy even less, forcing prices down further, which causes even more businesses to fail. This is the deflationary vortex, a black hole from which an economy can't easily escape. John Maynard Keynes, the most influential economist of the 20th century, stared directly into this abyss. His motivation wasn't just academic, it was a visceral fear of societal collapse. He saw this deflationary spiral not as a natural market function, but as a terminal illness for Western civilization. He believed it would destroy capitalism and open the door to political extremism. This is why the Great Depression is the first and most important ghost in our story. Because of the terror Keynes and his contemporaries felt, they forged a new economic consensus. The single most important lesson they passed down was that deflation is an enemy to be defeated at all costs. This institutional memory, this foundational fear, created the intellectual justification for accepting its opposite. It's the reason policymakers today believe that a little bit of inflation isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature, a protective wall against the far greater monster of deflation. Because of this institutional terror of deflation, John Maynard Keynes proposed a radical bargain. He argued that waiting for the free market to fix itself during a depression was like waiting for a patient to recover while they bled to death. His strategic solution was for the government to become the economy's doctor. When people and businesses were too scared to spend, Keynes said the government must step in and spend for them, on roads, on dams, on anything. This is the heart of demand-side economics. Think of it like a stalled engine. The government's job is to provide the jump start. But here's the problem. The calculated trade-off buried in his logic. How does a government spend money it doesn't have? It prints it. Or, more accurately, it borrows it into existence. And when more money chases the same amount of goods, prices tend to rise. This is inflation. For Keynes and the generations of policymakers he influenced, this was not a bug. It was a feature. A little bit of inflation was a small, manageable price to pay to keep the gears of the economy turning and to keep people employed. It was a little dose of poison to cure the far deadlier disease of deflation. This is the moment the entire philosophy shifted. The goal was no longer stable money. The goal was stable employment. And if that meant your savings lost a little value each year, it was considered a worthy sacrifice for the greater good. For decades, the Keynesian bargain seemed to work. The post-war West experienced a historic economic boom. But by the 1970s, the side effects of the cure began to spiral out of control. And then the unthinkable happened. The economy broke. The two dials that were supposed to move in opposite directions, unemployment and inflation, suddenly started rising at the same time. This was the birth of a new economic monster, a creature that the old textbooks said could not exist. Stagflation, stagnant economy, runaway inflation. It was like having a fever and frostbite simultaneously. Imagine filling up your car for a price that shocks you, only to drive past the factory where your neighbor was just laid off. Your money was buying less and less, while the country was getting poorer and poorer. This was the crisis of the 1970s. It wasn't just an economic problem, it was a psychological one. The Keynesian promise that a little inflation could buy you prosperity and job security was shattered. The managed poison was now seeping into everything, corroding public trust and creating a sense of powerless dread. This is the second ghost that haunts our story. While the Great Depression taught policymakers to fear deflation, the 1970s taught them to fear something else entirely, the loss of control. It created a new overriding mandate that would define the next 50 years of economic policy. Inflation was no longer a tool to be managed, but an enemy to be conquered at any and all costs. The crisis of the 1970s created a question that terrified Washington. Who was willing to push the economy off a cliff to save it? The answer came in the form of a 6'7", cigar-chomping banker named Paul Volcker. Appointed head of the Federal Reserve in 1979, Volcker was given a singular, brutal mission: kill inflation, no matter what. And he understood that this wasn't a negotiation, it was a war. His weapon was the interest rate, which is just the cost of borrowing money. Volcker decided to make money so expensive that the entire economy would grind to a halt. This was a calculated act of economic destruction. He jacked up interest rates to an astonishing 20%. Businesses stopped investing. Construction sites fell silent. Farmers who had borrowed heavily sent tractors to blockade the Federal Reserve building in protest. Volcker received death threats. He was, by far, the most hated man in America. But here's the crucial point. He was unelected. He didn't have to face voters. He could withstand the political firestorm. And his shock therapy worked. By 1983, inflation had collapsed from nearly 15% to under 3%. The cost was a deep, punishing recession and millions of lost jobs. But because of Volcker, a new precedent was set in stone. He proved that an independent central bank, insulated from political pressure, could single-handedly break the back of inflation. This is the moment that transformed central bankers from quiet financial plumbers into the undisputed high priests of the economy, whose primary commandment was now clear: "Thou shalt not suffer inflation." Paul Volcker's success left the world's central bankers with a new problem. They had proven they could kill inflation, but what should they aim for instead? The ghost of the Great Depression meant that zero inflation was terrifying. If prices are flat, any small shock could tip the economy into a deflationary death spiral. They needed a buffer. The goal had to be a number that was low but decisively positive. But what number? You would think the answer came from complex economic models and years of academic research. You would be wrong. The answer came from a television interview in New Zealand in 1988. The country's finance minister had just given its central bank a new single mandate: achieve price stability. A journalist, sensing an opportunity, cornered the new central bank governor, Don Brash, on live television. "What does price stability actually mean?" he asked. "Give me a number." Put on the spot, Brash needed an answer that sounded credible and firm. He didn't have a spreadsheet or a secret formula. He had his intuition. He later recalled thinking that the public understood zero, but that wasn't the goal. So he improvised. He said the target was around 0 to 1 or 1 to 2%. He plucked a number out of thin air. This wasn't economic science. It was a communication strategy. He was simply trying to signal low but not zero. That improvised, almost accidental answer, born from the pressure of a TV camera, would soon become the most influential number in the global economy. Don Brash's improvised number did something astonishing. It worked. Because he had a clear public target, everyone in New Zealand, from unions to businesses, knew the central bank's one and only job was to hit that number. This simple act of public commitment created a powerful new weapon: credibility. For the first time, a central bank could manage the expectations of inflation, not just inflation itself. This was the birth of the inflation targeting framework, a strategy so simple it was revolutionary. Think of it like giving a pilot a single destination instead of telling them to just fly well. This is why the idea went viral. Central bankers in Canada, the United Kingdom, and across Europe were watching. They were still haunted by the political battles of the 1970s and the brutal Volcker recession. They saw what Brash had achieved. He had created a technocratic shield. By adopting a single, boring number, a central banker could stand before politicians and the public and say, "My hands are tied. My only job is to hit the target." It was a calculated move to depoliticize money. What they didn't fully grasp was the trade-off. In their desperate search for a silver bullet to slay the ghost of high inflation, they found a miracle cure from a small island nation. But this cure came with a side effect. It institutionalized the idea that your money should lose a little bit of value every single year, forever. And the world's most powerful central bank had yet to take the medicine. For years, the U.S. Federal Reserve resisted a hard inflation target. Unlike other central banks, the Fed had a dual mandate, a legal tightrope walk requiring it to balance the fight against inflation with the goal of maximum employment. To its governors, a rigid number felt like a straitjacket. They wanted flexibility. But a new generation of economists, led by a quiet academic named Ben Bernanke, saw this flexibility not as a strength, but a dangerous weakness. Bernanke was a student of the Great Depression. His deepest professional fear was deflation, that terrifying downward spiral of falling prices and wages. Because of this, he argued tirelessly that the Fed needed to make a promise. He believed a formal 2% target would act as an anchor for the entire economy. It would signal to everyone that the Fed would never allow deflation, but also wouldn't tolerate the chaos of high inflation. It was, in his view, the perfect middle ground. His argument was strategically effective. A clear target would build trust. Then came the 2008 financial crisis. Bernanke was now chairman of the Federal Reserve, holding the levers of the global financial system as it teetered on the brink of collapse. In the ensuing chaos, he finally had the political capital to make his academic theory a reality. In 2012, the Federal Reserve formally adopted an explicit 2% inflation target. This was the final step. A number guessed on a New Zealand talk show had now been enshrined as gospel in the world's most powerful financial institution. The guess had officially become dogma. And so we arrive at the end of our journey, back where we started, with that invisible treadmill in your bank account, the one that forces you to run faster every year just to stay in the same place. We now know who built that machine and why. It was built by ghosts. Because of the first ghost, the Great Depression, a generation of economists like Ben Bernanke developed a deep, institutional terror of deflation. They saw falling prices not as a bargain for consumers, but as the trigger for a catastrophic economic death spiral. This is why they believed a little bit of inflation was a necessary buffer, a safety wall against a far greater evil. Because of the second ghost, the stagflation of the 1970s, the public lost all faith in the vague promises of politicians. This is why central bankers, scarred by that memory, sought a clear, simple rule, a number, a promise they could make and be seen to keep. That number, plucked from the air in New Zealand and later enshrined as dogma by the Fed, was 2%. This leads us to the most consequential truth of this entire story. The slow, steady erosion of your purchasing power is not an accident. It is not a bug in the system. It is the system's primary, intended feature. It is the calculated price that central bankers decided society must pay to keep the ghosts of the past locked away. The system works because its pain is slow, quiet, and predictable, while the pain of deflation is fast, chaotic, and politically explosive. A 2% decay in your savings is a problem you can ignore for a year, maybe 5. A 20% drop in wages and prices is a crisis that topples governments. Faced with that trade-off, policymakers made a strategic choice. They chose the slow burn over the sudden explosion. But here's the consequence of that choice. It fundamentally changes the nature of money. Your dollar is no longer designed to be a stable store of wealth. It is now a melting ice cube, an asset you are implicitly punished for holding. The system creates a permanent, relentless incentive to spend or to speculate, to put your money at risk in the market, hoping to outrun the treadmill's deliberate speed. That feeling that you can't get ahead by simply saving, that isn't in your head. It's the sound of the machine working exactly as designed. If you found this eye-opening, hit subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden mechanics of our world. And leave a comment. What's the biggest way you felt the effects of inflation in your own life?